Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Necronalysis. I'm Atraitus, and today I'm going to be covering Stronghold Crusader. It came out in 2002, and it's a standalone expansion to Stronghold, which came out in 2001. It's by Firefly Studios, and it was originally published by Take-Two Interactive and God Games, and now it's self-published. Unlike the other games I've covered, this is a game that I have not played particularly extensively before. I've mostly just done custom games and had fun with it. I've honestly never finished a historical campaign or a Crusader trail before I made the video for this game. I chose Stronghold Crusader because the Stronghold series is itself fairly unique in that it's a castle simulation. And I've always really enjoyed Stronghold Crusader, even though I've never really gotten super into it. It's a flawed, but a very fun game, and it's something I can really dig my teeth into in this analysis. And I chose Stronghold Crusader in particular because I don't actually own Stronghold, and I think Crusader is the better game anyway. And Stronghold Crusader is a hybrid of a castle sim and real-time strategy game. It's not amazing at the RTS portion. The castle management is really the core of the game, and it's the best part. And obviously, judging by the title, it's set in the Crusades. So in Stronghold Crusader, you design and defend a castle, wage wars against AI of differing levels of incompetence, and you do what I'm terming macro-managing of your castle and economy. It's kind of the opposite of micromanaging, in that you don't finally control each civilian. So let's really just dive on in and see what Stronghold Crusader is all about. The first mechanic that I'd really like to talk about is building. Everything builds instantly. This means that resources are really the only constraint, unlike in many other RTSs, where buildings take time to construct. This means that when you're in a combat mode, rushes are very effective and very possible. It does, however, allow for building castles very quickly to counteract rushes if you have the starting resources for it. It also means that in the early game, maybe the first 5 minutes, it's very, very hectic as you're trying to get your castle together and some early forces out, as well as trying to get your economy on track and your food supply going. Once the mid-game arrives, though, once you get beyond that first 5 minutes and everything is established, the pace of the game really slows way down. However, the fast early pace and the early danger of rushes means that creating a smart town or castle design is kind of difficult to do, even though this is a simulation that really rewards good castle design. In terms of castle design, the keep is usually pre-placed, but it's not necessarily. And buildings can't be placed beyond a certain radius from your keep. This makes tactics like surrounding your opponents with instantly built walls to cut off their resources impossible. That's probably a good thing. But generally your castles should be designed for the terrain, even though in combat mode there's usually not actually time to pull it off. You just whip together a quick castle and hope it's good enough. The town within or around your castle can be a bit complex to design, though. It should include services like Firewatch, that's very important. Production buildings should really be as close as possible to their respective storage and to the stockpile. The town really should run like a well-oiled machine, freeing the player from micromanaging their combat. And the player also has to decide whether they want to be loved or feared with their town design. There are certain buildings that can be placed that increase your fear factor, and there are certain buildings that decrease your fear factor. If you're loved, that increases your popularity, which I'll discuss in a moment, and that makes taxation easier and lessens your productivity. As well as taxation, it also makes every unpopular action easier to take. As I said before, though, that comes at the cost of reducing your citizens' productivity as they spend more time just wandering around doing absolutely nothing. Being feared, on the other hand, increases your productivity, but it decreases your popularity, which makes unpopular actions such as taxes much more difficult. Personally, I don't have much of a use for being either loved or feared, and I just focus on a strong, balanced economy. I've found that to be the best approach. although that's probably more of a leadership style choice. And next comes the economy simulation, which is probably the most in-depth system in Stronghold Crusader, and it involves food, wood, stone, iron, and gold as the primary resources. Gold comes from taxation and selling your other resources, and in my opinion at least, the best source of gold is probably making and selling metal armor, or raw iron if you actually can't make armor, as is the case in some scenarios. Food comes from farms or hunters, and once again the best source in my opinion is wheat farms, as wheat farms will take up the least amount of space on your already very limited oases. Wheat does take more population to produce food, however, as you have to staff mills and then bakeries to turn the raw wheat into food that you can actually eat. Stone comes from quarries, it's the only source other than just buying it, iron from mines, and wood from trees. The resources are really basically infinite. If you cut too many trees down though, no more trees are going to grow, and purchasing wood will at that point be the only way to acquire it. But other than that, they're completely infinite. You can buy and sell every resource at the market, and a large amount of your income will probably come from exporting goods, not necessarily from taxation. That's my preferred form of income. Once you have your town designed, you have to defend your town, and that's really only relevant in combat modes, but if you want to be realistic or historically accurate, you should probably try to defend it even in castle building modes. Your best defense is probably moats, as even if the computer is smart enough to fill in the moats, which many of them are not, it's going to take quite a bit of time. And behind the moats you should probably put up walls and towers with archers on them. The archers are long enough range to stop mostly anything, even most siege weapons. There are a few that will outrange archers, but at that point you can just send out horse archers and kill them all. Defending your castle is really pretty easy in Stronghold Crusader. In order to have enough peasants to staff all of your buildings, you need to build hovels, which is, of course, instantaneous. The peasants don't, however, come to the castle instantly. The speed at which they come is affected by your popularity. But your army doesn't actually count towards population and is limited separately. Actually, it's limited globally instead of by player. So if you build a large early army, you can actually significantly outclass later units. I really don't know what the civilian population is, though. I've never reached it. You're honestly more limited by your food production or purchasing power than the actual hard cap. Your popularity increases the speed of peasants coming to your castle, and is affected by many factors, some of which include food production, religion coverage, fear factor. There are really many things that factor into your popularity. If your popularity is 100, which is the maximum, you can balance detrimental effects with your positive effects. For example, taxes. People don't like taxes, because you can't gain any more popularity. So if you keep your incoming popularity for the coming month as 0, you will neither gain nor lose popularity. You will stay at the maximum level, and you can gain the effects of, say, the increased gold income from taxes, or, say, reduced food consumption, which can be very useful in the event of sieges and such. As far as combat goes, I find it to be the weakest portion of the game. Melee troops are really slow and are vulnerable to mass archers. In fact, mass archers beats almost everything. It might be beaten by cavalry, but honestly I've never come across an AI who builds mass cavalry. Although horse archers are just generally better than regular archers because they can kite for all time. They move at the same speed as cavalry, and they can shoot while moving, so they are really, really, really good. In fact, I find that they're really the best unit in the game, and nothing can really shut down mass cavalry. This is why I say that the combat is really the weakest portion of the game. Really, the combat feels very disjointed from the castle simulation. The simulation is much more compelling, and I would have really liked to see more focus on the sim itself. For example, create maps where the situation is we need this place for a tactical reason. It's terrible economically in terms of food supply, but just make it work. We need it tactically. And then have it be perhaps periodic attacks on the castle that you have to defend yourself from. This is done a little bit in the campaigns, but not particularly significantly, and I feel it's really the strongest portion of the game. As far as similar achievements with modern game design, the Stronghold series is really the only castle sim in existence that I know of, at least. Modern Stronghold games have really suffered from poor AI, and while the AI isn't great in Stronghold Crusader, it's okay. But the question of how similar mechanics are achieved with modern game design isn't particularly relevant. The formula for the Stronghold series hasn't really changed throughout the years, and it really has no competition, which is a bit of a shame because the castle simulation idea is a fairly strong idea. In terms of how the game stacks up with modern games, as you can see, the graphics and the art style are very dated. They went for a pre-rendered effect that has really low animation quality. There's very few frames in each animation. The sound design is okay, it's not fantastic. The music, though, is actually really good. And mechanically, the castle sim is very detailed, it's actually very good. The RTS portion and the combat, on the other hand, is just not nearly as good as it could have been. Overall, it stands up okay, but it's not the best game ever. The graphics are really particularly bad and are a major weakness of this game, along with the RTS portion. To improve the game, the first recommendation that I have is really just to improve the animation quality. The frame rate is just terrible. You can see it particularly badly in the horse archers. They only have like 3 frames and they're sliding along the ground. Another way they could improve the game is to balance the combat better. Maybe they could make swordsmen and other melee troops slightly faster to be able to catch up with archers who can simply kite them. They can also nerf rushes. The AI is particularly susceptible to those. Perhaps they could make units have a training time, like in many other RTSs, rather than being instantly recruited. They could make the game really more about castle building and defending the castle, and less about castle sieging. That's not really the interesting part of the game. They really try to straddle that line, and it doesn't work quite as well as they would have liked. And perhaps they should have added some building time in there to slow down the early game just a little bit. It's pretty hectic with the instant building. Whoever builds their buildings faster really has a very large advantage over their opponents. So if they added building time, perhaps that would slow that down just a little bit. So then it comes down to, is the game still worth playing? Probably yes. It's the best game in the Stronghold series, in my opinion. It's a very good castle simulation, but it's not a very good RTS. Don't play it for the real-time strategy component. Play it for the castle management, because that's where this game really shines. In terms of an updated or remade version, Firefly are currently working on Stronghold Crusader 2. Hopefully it won't be plagued by AI problems like the later Strongholds were. And there really should be an updated version at least. They should modernize the graphics, and hopefully bring the real-time strategy elements up to date as well. If you do want to play Stronghold Crusader, it runs perfectly on modern systems as is. There are no tweaks necessary at all. There is an HD patch. It allows modern widescreen resolutions, but it really just zooms out the graphics, and it makes the already low-ish quality graphics really hard to read. I found it to be largely worthless. It just looks a lot better and it plays a lot better at 1024 by 768 rather than at 1920 by 1080. It was clearly not designed to be played at widescreen resolutions, so just play it where it was designed to be. You can get a copy of the game on GOG, or if you're so inclined, you can also get it on Steam. It'll be $9.99 either way at time of recording, and the links to both of those sources are in the description. So if you enjoyed Necronalysis or found it useful, like, comment, subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it or you didn't find it useful, leave a comment saying why you watched it when you could have been following strangers around a store spraying everything they touch with disinfectant. New Necronalysis next week on Friday as usual. I apologize for the lack of one last week. There was illness, as well as other extenuating circumstances. But we are back to the regular schedule, and there will be a new Necronalysis next Friday. Until then, fare thee well.